After hours upon hours of playing through Elden Ring and beating the game not only once, but twice, I decided to go play another From Software game. A lot of you in the comments on my Elden Ring video were saying, oh, Bloodborne this, Dark Souls that, but why play any of those when I've had this bad boy right here in my backlog for the past 2 years?
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Now, I actually meant to play Demon's Souls a while ago, back when I first got my PS5, but decided to push it back up until recently because of how much I loved Elden Ring. I thought, hey, since I already own it, why not give it a try, and it's different. Demon's Souls released originally in 2009 as a PS3 exclusive and was From Software's first venture into their widely popular Soulsborne format of games. While it's not connected to Dark Souls when it comes to the lore, this is the game that created the basics of the Souls gameplay that eventually led to the creation of a whole subgenre of games labeled as Souls-likes. Other entries in this genre include other games created by From Software like Dark Souls 1 through 3, which popularized the genre, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Elden Ring, along with other games created by other studios like Lies of P, Hollow Knight, and Jedi Fallen Order. Even though the Dark Souls games are the most popular and get the majority of the credit for creating the genre, Demon's Souls was the first, and the only reason it gets overlooked I feel is because of just how basic it is. I'm not using that to knock the game, of course it's simple, it's the first of its kind. It doesn't make it bad, it just kinda helps people overlook it when the next few were just better. But in the year 2020, with the release of the PS5, Demon's Souls received a remake by Bluepoint Games, and with that came new features and changes, right? This new remake is the version of the game that I played, and from what I've heard is a pretty faithful remake. It didn't try to change the gameplay or anything, it just made the game look and load up a lot better. It did add some quality of life improvements and a handful of items for some incentive, but nothing to really care about. Depending on who you may ask, people might like this choice or hate it, but I honestly could care less since I've never actually played the original. And even then, why would I want to use these cheap new items when I can just use this?
6.5 hours later.
Oh, Uchigatana, my beloved, how I have missed you. Say all you want about me using a katana bleed build in both games. Fucking sue me if you want, I don't care. The moment I found out that I can use the same weapon as I did in Elden Ring to yet again wipe the floor with everyone, I just had to. The Uchi is basically old reliable at this point, and I proceeded to use it the entire game, never upgrading it past Sharp plus 2, cause fucking, I ain't no bitch. Now before I continue, let me just say there will be spoilers for the game if anyone even still cares. The story in the game is fairly simple. Actually, really simple. Probably the easiest to understand in the entire Souls franchise. Everything kinda comes down to the kingdom of Boletaria being consumed by a dark entity called the Old One. As the protagonist of the story, you are brought to the kingdom with the sole purpose of making your way through to kill King Allant and to pacify the Old One. And that is exactly what you do. You explore the castle, slay demons, and end up falling down a big ass hole with this blind bitch. Lady. I meant blind lady. Now, even after playing Elden Ring and knowing how many endings that game had, I still kinda assumed this game only had one ending, or at least a button prompt to pick between two endings. So after defeating the final boss and getting told to leave, I kinda just... yeah, I got the bad ending on accident. My friend told me to kill her and I fucked around and found out. In this ending, you just replace the Old One and become a demon yourself. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not complaining. It caught me off guard and was kind of funny. In the good ending, you just leave. And the maiden just leaves along with the old one, so at least the evil ending is a little more interesting, I guess. All in all, the story is simple, yet effective. It's easy to follow along while playing, and while there's some depth to the background stories, there's nothing else important to note, but I feel the same way about pretty much every aspect of the game. It's all simple, but also effective, which is why I like it. The maps, for example, are separated into more of a level-based system, with there being 5 worlds, and each world having on average 3 levels, 2 of which being actual explorable areas, and the third being a big, dramatized boss fight. When I made my Elden Ring video, I talked very highly about the big open world and how I loved being able to explore every crevice and being given the option to play the game in pretty much my own order, but this is kind of cool too. In Demon Souls, you can go from level to level pretty seamlessly by just walking around through each of the locations, and the quote-unquote levels are just different checkpoints in the same world, so it really boils down to just 5 big old levels, ranging from castle, to cave, to swamp, to castle again, and jail. All with that From Software aesthetic to make it look and sound a little less generic. I mean, there's only so much you can do with the medieval fantasy setting, I know. But you know what did help? Man, they never miss. They just do not miss. The music is still a banger. I won't lie, I don't like it as much as Elden Ring's music or some of the Dark Souls tracks I've heard, but man, this music is good. Great, even. At this point, I may even want to fuck the music. Sorry about that, I got a little too ahead of myself, but yeah, the music's aight. Let me just move on to the gameplay. Honestly, the gameplay is what you'd expect from a Souls game. Even if it may be a tad simpler, it's practically just the same as it is in the newer games. Except I noticed a slight change when playing Elden Ring. I stayed mainly using my sword, not really caring about much else, but in this game I not only used my sword, but also a shield and bow and arrow. It felt kinda necessary due to the enemy encounters being slightly more difficult. I couldn't just walk in all powerful and mow everything down like I did in Elden Ring, and in certain situations, used the bow to take down an enemy faster and actually started blocking with shields, which felt actually useful. Unlike this fucking stupid ass fucking garbage. By the end of the run, I had a spiked shield, a sharp uchi, the lava bow, the cling ring, and the thief ring, and some shitty early game armor. While it took some effort to get these items, mainly the lava bow, it wasn't that much of a grind. The hardest part was probably leveling up the gear, which even then wasn't that big of a deal. When going into the game, I read some people say it was pretty hard and I was expecting a significant jump in difficulty, yet when I played it, it was actually a lot easier. Even though it made me use items outside of my main dex sword, the challenges the game threw at me weren't that bad, and the majority of the boss fights were just gimmick bosses. The only fight that reminded me of the big spectacle Elden Ring fights was the final boss, Old King Alon. I won't lie, his fight was kinda fun, but at the same time I beat it first try, and besides him, the rest of the fights were kinda just too easy. They were cinematic for sure, but not really the challenge I expected from a Souls game. Coming from Elden Ring, I feel like comparing the two, the bosses in Demon Souls were just a lot easier. Even though in Elden Ring you can just level up and come back, but also the regular enemy encounters in Demon Souls were harder, which I guess is a fair trade-off, but I'm not sure if I like that. I know dying to the main enemies in dumb, stupid ways is part of the series' magic, but it just feels very lackluster going through an area filled with godlike enemies for the boss fight to just be this. While I still thought the bosses were unique and fun, I just expected a little more out of them. I know, I'm ungrateful, I'm sorry. But while we're on the topic of what I didn't like about the game, firstly, fuck these things. Secondly, I didn't like how empty the game felt. I know the original is about 15 years old now, but when finding and speaking to NPCs, they were just boring. None of the characters really had any dialogue, and if they did, it felt like they had no personality at all. The world building outside of the main story just isn't that great in this game, and I know it's a smaller, more linear game, so it may be harder to fit that into it, but there's NPCs here. There's plenty in the Nexus hub world and plenty in the levels themselves. Some even have quests, yet they still aren't interesting to talk to or engage with, which is something I expected coming into this game. Now my last major problem with this game might get me a lot of hate, and that's the world tendencies. I know that's this game's like whole shtick, but you basically have to play the game all the way through in soul form to really get any enjoyment. I fucked up early on not knowing about it and ended up having red enemies spawn everywhere and just piss me off. I know it's such like a nitpick thing and people will hate me for it, but I'm just speaking my truth. It's not necessarily the world tendencies that piss me off as much as playing in soul form does. I don't know. I just feel like it could have been done a little differently, you know, without cutting my health bar in half. Man, I already know I'm gonna have people in the comments telling me to get good. Every other negative thing I could say about the game would mainly boil down to how janky it is at points, but I feel like some of that jankiness kinda adds to the game's charms and helps it more than it would tear it down. Some of the game's main positives in my opinion were the music, of course, the beautiful graphics thanks to the remake, the unique locations, the poop monster, and surprisingly how linear it is. I touched on it a little earlier on in the video, but when you look at Elden Ring, I feel like it did the open world perfectly with the freedom complementing the gameplay style. While with Demon's Souls, the linear level system also complements the game. The game allows you to play the worlds in any order, giving you the freedom to skip to a harder area, yet to progress to the next level in that world, you must beat the previous one. The game still offers you some freedom while at the same time having an almost completely different map design, which I absolutely love to see. I have now played both the first and most recent Souls games, and while they're both different in a lot of ways, at their core it's pretty much the same. Just a fantasy game about rolling, fighting bosses, and dying in the most rage-inducing ways imaginable. Demon's Souls is the most important game in the entire series. Literally, I mean, it was the first one. Without it, Elden Ring wouldn't even exist, and even then, 7 games later, it still holds up on its own. I give Demon's Souls an 8 out of 10. While it's definitely a great game and I didn't have that many problems with it, I just don't really see it as a great game I'd replay in the future. Hell, I don't even see it as a must-play once. It was great, don't get me wrong, but after finishing the game, it left me wanting more, but at the same time, not wanting to play New Game Plus. Definitely, if you have the game, I recommend playing it. Either that, or if you've played any of the other Souls games, go back to it and play it if you haven't already. It's a great game, but if you have never played a Souls game in your life, I wouldn't recommend playing this as your first. And I'm lucky I didn't. But even though I didn't love it as much as I did Elden Ring, I understand why it was so influential, and how it was able to create its own genre. It is a modern age gem, overshadowed by its successors. But you know, maybe it'd be more popular without fucking World 5, bro. This shit sucks. Why is there a poop monster? Leechmonger my ass. This is literal shit, my man. Did Miyazaki play Conqueror's Bad Fur Day drunk and say, yeah, this shit fire?